Staff Sergeant Samantha Viper Cross had spent 3 tours in Afghanistan keeping her true capabilities buried beneath a facade of quiet professionalism. But when Admiral Gregory Thornfield decided to humiliate her by confiscating her Barrett.50 caliber rifle in front of 200 military personnel, he had no idea he was about to experience the most painful lesson of his 30-year career. One that would end with his shoulder dislocated and 20 impossible targets shredded by the most precise shooting display in Fort Bragg's history. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Bragg's Special Operations Training Center as Staff Sergeant Samantha Cross walked across the compound, her worn combat boots making barely a sound on the asphalt. At 28, she carried herself with the measured gait of someone who had learned to move through the world without drawing attention, a skill that had kept her alive through 3 brutal deployments in Afghanistan and had served her well during her difficult transition back to stateside military life. To the casual observer, Samantha appeared unremarkable. Average height, lean build, dark hair pulled back in regulation style. She wore her uniform with precision, but without the swagger that characterized many of the elite operators training at Fort Bragg. Her fellow soldiers saw her quiet demeanor and assumed she was just another support specialist trying to blend in among the special operations community. They couldn't have been more wrong. What they didn't know was that Samantha Cross held the unofficial record for the longest confirmed kill shot in the Afghanistan theater, a 2,847-meter elimination that had saved an entire platoon from an insurgent sniper nest. What they didn't know was that she had been recommended for the Medal of Honor twice, both times classified at levels that prevented public recognition. What they didn't know was that the woman they dismissed as just another desk jockey had earned the call sign Viper by striking from distances and angles that her enemies never saw coming. Samantha had requested the transfer to Fort Bragg's training center, not for advancement or recognition, but because she needed space to readjust to a world that wasn't trying to kill her every day. The transition from combat operations to peacetime military service had been harder than any firefight she survived. The hypervigilance that had kept her alive overseas had become a burden in garrison life, where every unexpected sound didn't signal incoming mortars and every shadow didn't conceal an enemy fighter. The Army's transition programs had been well-intentioned but inadequate for someone with her particular set of experiences. Group therapy sessions filled with soldiers who had served in support roles couldn't address the specific challenges faced by someone who had spent years as a lone wolf operator, making life-and-death decisions in milliseconds while isolated behind enemy lines. Individual counseling had been more helpful, but even the most experienced military psychologists struggled to understand the mindset required for her type of work. So, Samantha had chosen a different path. She had requested assignment to the training center's marksmanship program, hoping that teaching others might provide the sense of purpose she had lost when her operational career ended. It was meaningful work, passing on skills that could save lives, but it was also safe work that wouldn't trigger the combat reflexes she was trying to manage. Fort Bragg's Special Operations Training Center was home to some of the most elite military units in the world. Delta Force, Green Berets, Rangers, and Navy SEALs all cycled through the facility for advanced training and specialized courses. The atmosphere was charged with the kind of testosterone-fueled competitiveness that Samantha had learned to navigate carefully. These were men and women accustomed to being the best at everything they did, and they didn't always respond well to instruction from someone they perceived as an outsider.
Samantha's approach to teaching had been deliberately low-key. She focused on technical aspects of marksmanship, wind reading, ballistic calculations, and equipment maintenance rather than trying to impress students with war stories or displays of superior skill. Her performance evaluations were consistently excellent, but she had managed to avoid the kind of attention that might lead to questions about her background or capabilities. The training center's director, Colonel Diana Foster, had noticed Samantha's effectiveness as an instructor and had been subtly encouraging her to take on more challenging assignments. Foster was one of the few people at Fort Bragg who had been briefed on the classified aspects of Samantha's service record, and she recognized that the Army was wasting an extraordinary asset by keeping her in a routine training role. But Foster also understood that Samantha needed time and space to heal from experiences that most people couldn't even imagine. The morning that would change everything started like dozens of others. Samantha arrived at the range complex at 0530, 2 hours before her first class, to conduct equipment checks and review the day's training schedule. She preferred the quiet hours before dawn, when the facility was nearly empty and she could work without the social dynamics that still made her uncomfortable. Her PTSD symptoms had improved significantly since leaving Afghanistan, but crowds and unexpected interactions could still trigger anxiety responses that she worked hard to manage. Her primary weapon for advanced marksmanship instruction was a Barrett N82A1 .50 caliber sniper rifle, a precision instrument capable of engaging targets at distances exceeding 2 kilometers. The Barrett was more than a rifle. It was an extension of her capabilities, a tool that she had mastered through countless hours of practice and operational experience. Every component of the weapon system was familiar to her: the feel of the bolt action, the precise trigger break, the recoil characteristics that had been burned into her muscle memory through thousands of rounds fired under combat conditions. Samantha had customized the Barrett's setup based on lessons learned in Afghanistan. The scope was a high-end loop-holed with custom turrets calibrated for the specific ballistic characteristics of her preferred ammunition. The bipod had been modified for faster deployment and more stable positioning. Even the sling system had been adjusted to accommodate her preferred carrying position and rapid deployment techniques. To most observers, these modifications appeared routine, but they represented years of refinement and adaptation under the most demanding conditions imaginable. The first hint of trouble came during her morning equipment inspection. Master Sergeant Riley O'Connor approached her position with the kind of measured stride that suggested official business. O'Connor was a veteran NCO with 22 years of service, most of it in special operations. He had earned Samantha's respect through his professional competence and his willingness to treat her as an equal rather than an outsider. "Cross," O'Connor said, his voice carrying an undertone of concern, "Colonel Foster wants to see you in her office at 800. Something about a special visitor and changes to today's training schedule." The request was unusual, but not alarming. Schedule changes were common in the military, especially when high-ranking officials visited training facilities. Samantha completed her equipment checks and made her way to the administration building, her mind already adapting to whatever modifications might be required for the day's instruction. Colonel Foster's office occupied a corner of the building, with windows overlooking the main training ranges. Foster herself was a compact woman in her 40s. Her graying hair and weathered features reflected a career that had included multiple combat deployments and assignments to some of the Army's most challenging positions. She had earned her rank through competence and dedication rather than political maneuvering, and her leadership style reflected those priorities.
"Take a seat, Samantha," Foster said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. "We need to discuss today's training schedule." The change in Foster's demeanor was subtle but noticeable. Instead of the relaxed professionalism that characterized their usual interactions, there was a tension that suggested complications beyond routine schedule adjustments. "Admiral Gregory Thornfield is visiting the facility today. He's conducting an evaluation of our training programs for a Pentagon review board. He specifically requested to observe advanced marksmanship instruction." Samantha nodded, already anticipating the implications. High-ranking visitors often meant dog and pony shows, designed to impress rather than genuine training activities. "What modifications do you need for the demonstration?" Foster's expression tightened. "That's where things get complicated. Admiral Thornfield has very specific ideas about military training and performance standards. He's also..." Foster paused, choosing her words carefully. "He's known for having strong opinions about the integration of women in combat roles." The warning was clear without being explicit. Admiral Thornfield was one of those senior officers whose career had been built during an era when women's roles in the military were far more restricted, and he had apparently not adapted well to the changes that had occurred over the past 2 decades. Samantha had encountered his type before. Officers who viewed women in combat positions as political experiments rather than capable soldiers. "I understand," Samantha said. "What do you need me to do?" Foster leaned forward, her voice dropping to a more confidential tone. Run a professional training session. Don't take any bait if he tries to provoke you. Your service record speaks for itself, but most of it is classified at levels he doesn't have access to. To him, you're just another female NCO in a role he doesn't think you should have. The briefing continued for another 10 minutes, covering the specific details of the Admiral's visit and the expectations for the training demonstration. As Samantha walked back to the range complex, she found herself mentally preparing for a type of challenge she had hoped to avoid. Not the technical challenges of teaching marksmanship, but the social and political challenges of dealing with senior leadership who had already decided she didn't belong. What neither Colonel Foster nor Samantha could have anticipated was that Admiral Thornfield's visit would become the catalyst that finally forced Samantha to confront the gap between who she was pretending to be and who she really was. The quiet, unassuming instructor was about to be replaced by the combat veteran who had earned her reputation one impossible shot at a time. And Admiral Thornfield was about to learn why it was dangerous to underestimate a viper just because it wasn't showing its fangs.
Admiral Gregory Thornfield's convoy arrived at Fort Bragg at precisely 0930 hours, a calculated display of military precision that announced his presence to everyone within a half-mile radius. The three black Suburbans moved through the facility gates with the kind of self-important authority that characterized flag officers who had spent too many years insulated from the realities of ground-level military operations. Thornfield himself emerged from the lead vehicle like a man accustomed to being the most important person in any room he entered. At 62, Admiral Thornfield cut an imposing figure. Tall and broad-shouldered, his uniform bore the ribbons and insignia of a career that had included command positions in both the Atlantic and Pacific fleets. His silver hair was perfectly groomed, his posture ramrod straight, and his expression carried the perpetual slight frown of someone who expected to find fault with whatever he was inspecting. This was a man who had built his reputation on demanding perfection and had little patience for anything that fell short of his exacting standards. Thornfield's aide, Commander Patricia Henley, followed closely behind, her tablet already active as she coordinated the Admiral's schedule with Fort Bragg's staff. Henley was 15 years younger than her boss, a career Navy officer who had learned to navigate the complex dynamics of serving under a superior whose management style belonged to a previous era of military leadership. She had developed a talent for smoothing over the rough edges of Thornfield's interactions while maintaining the professional respect that her position demanded. The third member of the Admiral's party was Captain Marcus Webb, a staff officer whose primary function was to document the visit for the Pentagon Review Board that had commissioned Thornfield's evaluation of Army training programs. Webb carried himself with the careful neutrality of someone whose career depended on accurately reporting observations without becoming personally involved in whatever politics might be driving the inspection. Colonel Foster greeted the visiting party with the kind of professional courtesy that concealed her true feelings about hosting an officer whose reputation for controversy had preceded him. The morning briefing in Foster's office was cordial but tense, with Thornfield asking pointed questions about training methodologies, resource allocation, and performance standards that suggested he had already formed opinions about what he expected to find. "I'm particularly interested in your advanced marksmanship program," Thornfield said, consulting notes that Commander Henley had prepared for him. "The Navy has been evaluating whether to adopt similar training protocols, but I have concerns about the standards being applied." Foster maintained her diplomatic tone while internally preparing for the challenge she had anticipated. "Our marksmanship program is conducted by highly qualified instructors using proven methodologies. Staff Sergeant Cross will be conducting today's demonstration." The slight tightening around Thornfield's eyes at the mention of a female NCO conducting the demonstration did not go unnoticed by anyone in the room. His next question confirmed Foster's concerns about his attitudes. "Staff Sergeant Cross," Thornfield repeated, making a note on his tablet. "What are her qualifications for instructing elite personnel? I assume she has extensive combat experience to warrant such a position." The loaded nature of the question was obvious to everyone present. Thornfield was not asking about Samantha's qualifications because he doubted them. He was asking because he expected them to be inadequate, and he wanted to establish that inadequacy on the record before observing her performance.
Foster chose her words carefully, constrained by the classified nature of Samantha's actual service record. Staff Sergeant Cross is a distinguished veteran with multiple deployments and exemplary performance evaluations. She has been conducting advanced marksmanship instruction here for 18 months with consistently outstanding results.
Multiple deployments, Thornfield mused. In what capacity? Support roles, I assume? The condescension in his tone was unmistakable, and Foster felt her professional composure being tested. Staff Sergeant Cross served in various capacities that I'm not at liberty to discuss in detail. Her competence as an instructor speaks for itself. Commander Henley, recognizing the tension building in the room, attempted to redirect the conversation toward logistics. Admiral, perhaps we should proceed to the range facility to observe the training session directly. Thornfield nodded, but his expression suggested that he had already reached conclusions about what he expected to observe. The walk to the range complex gave him an opportunity to survey the facility with the critical eye of someone looking for deficiencies to report. His running commentary to Captain Webb was pitched just loud enough for Foster to overhear, a calculated rudeness that established his opinion of Army training standards. Note the condition of the equipment storage areas, he told Webb. Navy facilities maintain higher standards of organization. Also observe the casual interaction between enlisted personnel and NCOs. Discipline appears to be more relaxed than optimal. Foster bit back her response to these unfair characterizations, focusing instead on ensuring that the demonstration would proceed smoothly despite the hostile atmosphere that Thornfield was creating. She had dealt with difficult visiting officials before, but Thornfield's combination of arrogance and prejudice was testing her patience in ways that could become problematic if she wasn't careful. The range complex where Samantha conducted her advanced marksmanship classes was a state-of-the-art facility designed to accommodate training scenarios from close-quarters combat to extreme long-range precision shooting. Multiple firing positions were available at distances ranging from 25 meters to over a kilometer, with electronic target systems that could provide real-time feedback on accuracy and timing. Samantha had arrived early to prepare for the demonstration, arranging her equipment with the methodical precision that had become second nature during her years as an operational sniper. Her Barrett M82 A150 caliber rifle was positioned at the 1,000-meter firing point, its bipod deployed and the scope covers removed to allow for rapid engagement. Additional equipment, spotting scope, range cards, ammunition, and backup systems were organized within easy reach according to procedures she had refined through combat experience. The students for the demonstration were 8 special operations personnel from various units, all of them experienced marksmen who had requested advanced training to improve their long-range capabilities. They had been working with Samantha for 2 weeks and had developed a respect for her technical expertise and teaching ability, though none of them knew the full extent of her operational background. Staff Sergeant Derek Mitchell, a Green Beret sniper with 3 combat deployments, served as the informal leader of the student group. He had initially been skeptical about receiving instruction from someone he perceived as a support specialist, but Samantha's knowledge and teaching methods had quickly earned his respect. The techniques she taught went beyond basic marksmanship to include advanced concepts of ballistics, environmental factors, and target analysis that could only come from extensive practical experience. "Heads up, Mitchell," warned his fellow students as he observed the approaching party of officials. "Looks like we're getting the full dog and pony show treatment today." The students quickly arranged themselves in a semicircle around Samantha's firing position, their professional demeanor masking their curiosity about the high-ranking visitors who were about to observe their training. None of them had expected to attract the attention of a Navy admiral, and they weren't sure what his presence might mean for their instruction. Samantha herself appeared unaffected by the approaching inspection, continuing her pre-firing equipment checks with the same methodical attention to detail that characterized all of her preparations. But those who had worked with her long enough to read her subtle cues might have noticed the slight tension in her shoulders and the increased frequency of her equipment inspections. signs that she was preparing for more than routine training. Admiral Thornfield's first view of the range setup did nothing to improve his disposition. The sight of a female NCO conducting advanced weapons training for elite male personnel violated his fundamental beliefs about proper military organization and gender roles. His expression hardened as he observed Samantha's professional competence, which only made her presence in the role more objectionable to his outdated worldview. "Commander Henley," he said quietly, "make note of the instructor selection criteria. I want to understand how personnel decisions are made for these advanced training positions." Foster overheard the comment and realized that Thornfield's inspection was going to be more adversarial than she had anticipated. The Admiral wasn't just evaluating training methods, he was looking for evidence to support preconceived conclusions about women in combat roles, and Samantha had become his primary target. As the official party approached the firing line, Samantha came to attention and rendered the appropriate courtesies, her bearing reflecting years of military discipline, despite the civilian clothes and relaxed atmosphere of the training environment. Her salute was crisp, her posture perfect, and her manner respectfully professional. "Staff Sergeant Cross," Colonel Foster said, "I'd like you to meet Admiral Thornfield and his party. They're here to observe our advanced marksmanship training program." "Admiral," Samantha said, maintaining her position of attention until given permission to relax. "Welcome to Fort Bragg. I'm honored to have you observe our training." Thornfield's response was deliberately dismissive, his tone carrying the kind of condescension that was designed to establish dominance and create discomfort. "Staff Sergeant, I'm here to evaluate the effectiveness of this training program. I have some concerns about the standards being maintained and the qualifications of the instructional staff." The insult was delivered with the kind of plausible deniability that senior officers used to attack subordinates without technically violating regulations. But everyone present understood the real message. Thornfield had already decided that Samantha was unqualified for her position, and he intended to prove that point through his inspection. What Admiral Thornfield didn't realize was that his calculated provocation had just awakened something in Samantha that had been dormant since her return from Afghanistan. The quiet instructor who had been trying to blend into a garrison life was about to be replaced by the combat veteran who had never backed down from a challenge, regardless of the rank or attitude of the person issuing the instruction.
Admiral Thornfield walked slowly around the firing position, his inspection deliberately theatrical, as he examined Samantha's equipment with the exaggerated scrutiny of someone looking for problems to document. His aide, Commander Henley, followed closely behind with her tablet, recording observations that would later be compiled into the official report that had ostensibly brought them to Fort Bragg. The Barrett.50 .50 caliber rifle drew Thornfield's immediate attention, partly because of its impressive size, and partly because it represented exactly the kind of advanced weaponry that he believed should be reserved for male personnel. The rifle was a formidable piece of equipment, weighing 30 pounds fully loaded and capable of engaging targets at distances exceeding 2 miles with devastating effectiveness. In the right hands, it was one of the most precise long-range weapon systems in the world. "This is quite an impressive weapon system," Thornfield said, his tone suggesting that the impressiveness was wasted on its current operator. "Staff Sergeant, walk me through the specifications and capabilities of this rifle." Samantha began her explanation with professional competence, covering the technical details that any qualified instructor would know. "Sir, the Barrett.M82A1 is a semi-automatic anti-material rifle chambered in .50 BMG. Effective range exceeds 1,800 meters with maximum range approaching 7,000 meters depending on ammunition and environmental conditions. The system weighs 30 pounds loaded and utilizes a 10-round detachable magazine." "And you're qualified to operate this weapon system?" Thornfield asked, his skepticism obvious to everyone present. "Yes, sir. I'm certified as a senior instructor on all crew-served weapon systems, including the Barrett family of rifles." Thornfield picked up one of the .50 caliber rounds from Samantha's ammunition supply, examining it with exaggerated interest. The cartridge was massive compared to standard rifle ammunition,
nearly 6 inches long and weighing over an ounce. These were not rounds designed for casual target practice. They were precision manufactured for extreme range engagements where accuracy could mean the difference between mission success and failure. These are expensive rounds, Staff Sergeant. Each one costs more than most soldiers make in an hour. I hope you're not wasting taxpayer money with casual instruction. The implication was clear. Thornfield believed that Samantha was squandering resources on training that exceeded her competence to provide. Colonel Foster shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the building confrontation, but constrained by military protocol from intervening directly. Staff Sergeant Mitchell and the other students exchanged glances, the respect for Samantha making them uncomfortable with the Admiral's obvious hostility. They had seen her work, had benefited from her instruction, and knew that she was far more capable than Thornfield was assuming. But their position as students made it impossible for them to defend their instructor without violating military courtesy. Sir, every round fired in this program serves a specific training purpose. We maintain detailed documentation of ammunition expenditure and training outcomes. Thornfield set down the cartridge and turned his attention to the rifle's scope, a high-end Leupold system that had been customized with specialized turrets and reticle markings. His handling of the equipment was rough, deliberately disrespectful in a way that made everyone present uncomfortable. "This scope setup appears to be modified beyond standard specifications," he observed. "Are you authorized to make alterations to issued equipment?" "Sir, all modifications are documented and approved through proper channels. The customizations improve training effectiveness and are based on proven operational techniques." The answer was technically correct, but Thornfield had found the opening he was looking for. His next move was calculated to create maximum humiliation and establish his dominance over both Samantha and the situation. "Staff Sergeant, I'm uncomfortable with the modifications made to this weapon system. There are protocols for equipment standardization that don't appear to have been followed properly." Colonel Foster stepped forward. Sensing the direction of Thornfield's attack, "Admiral, all weapon modifications at this facility are approved through appropriate channels and documented according to regulation." Thornfield ignored Foster's intervention, his focus remaining fixed on Samantha. "Staff Sergeant, I'm confiscating this weapon system pending a complete inspection and review of the modification procedures. You'll conduct today's demonstration using standard, unmodified equipment." The order was delivered with the kind of absolute authority that flag officers were accustomed to exercising, but it was also a transparent attempt to undermine Samantha's competence by forcing her to use unfamiliar equipment. Everyone present understood the political nature of the confiscation, but military hierarchy made challenge impossible.
Samantha's response was measured and professional, despite the obvious injustice of the situation. "Sir, with respect, that rifle is my assigned weapon for this training program. I've been using it for 18 months and am intimately familiar with its characteristics. Are you questioning my order, Staff Sergeant?" The question carried the implicit threat that characterized interactions between senior officers and enlisted personnel when authority was being challenged. Thornfield was daring Samantha to escalate the confrontation, confident that her lower rank would prevent her from pushing back effectively. "No, sir. I'm simply noting that changing equipment will impact the effectiveness of today's demonstration." Thornfield's smile was cold and satisfied. "Then I suppose we'll discover whether your instructional abilities depend on specialized equipment or actual competence." Commander Henley gestured to 2 Marines from the security detail who had accompanied the Admiral's party. "Secure this weapon system for inspection," she ordered, her tone suggesting that she was uncomfortable with the directive, but bound to implement it. The Marines approached Samantha's position with obvious reluctance, their professional respect for a fellow NCO making them uncomfortable with their assigned task. They handled the Barrett with appropriate care, but the symbolism of the confiscation was unmistakable. Samantha was being stripped of her primary tool in front of her students and colleagues. Staff Sergeant Mitchell stepped forward, his Green Beret training making him unwilling to watch a fellow instructor be humiliated without consequence. "Admiral, if I may, Staff Sergeant Cross is one of the most knowledgeable instructors I've worked with. Her competence isn't dependent on any particular weapon system. Thornfield's expression hardened at the unexpected intervention. "Did I ask for your opinion, soldier?" "No, sir, but—" "Then keep your observations to yourself unless requested." The exchange crystallized the dynamic that Thornfield had been working to establish. He had successfully isolated Samantha, demonstrated his authority over everyone present, and created conditions that would allow him to document her presumed failure when forced to use unfamiliar equipment. But as the Marines carried away her Barrett, something shifted in Samantha's demeanor that was visible to anyone who knew how to read the signs. The careful deference she had maintained throughout the confrontation was replaced by something harder and more focused. Her shoulders squared slightly, her breathing became more controlled, and her gaze acquired the kind of intensity that combat veterans recognized as a prelude to action. Colonel Foster noticed the change and felt a mixture of anticipation and concern. She had seen hints of the real Samantha Cross during their private conversations, glimpses of capabilities that went far beyond routine instruction, but she had never witnessed what happened when those capabilities were fully engaged. Admiral Thornfield, satisfied with his successful humiliation of what he perceived as an unqualified instructor, turned to address the group of students. "Gentlemen, you're about to receive a valuable lesson about the importance of proper equipment standards and realistic performance expectations." What he didn't realize was that he had just made the most serious tactical error of his 30-year career. By confiscating Samantha's rifle, he had inadvertently issued a challenge that awakened instincts and abilities that had been dormant since her return from Afghanistan. The quiet instructor who had been trying to blend into garrison life was gone, replaced by the sniper who had never missed when lives depended on accuracy. "Admiral," Samantha said, her voice carrying a new edge that made everyone present pay attention. "You mentioned wanting to see a demonstration of actual competence rather than dependence on specialized equipment." "That's correct, Staff Sergeant." "Then let's proceed with the demonstration. But I should warn you that you might want to observe from a safe distance." The comment was delivered with such quiet confidence that even Thornfield paused to reconsider his assumptions about what he was about to witness. But his arrogance and prejudice had carried him too far to retreat, and he was committed to a course of action that would soon teach him why some vipers were more dangerous when cornered than when left alone. "Very well, Staff Sergeant. Show us what you can do with regulation equipment." It was the last order Admiral Thornfield would give before learning that some lessons are more painful than others, and that underestimating the wrong person could have consequences that lasted longer than the demonstration he thought he was controlling. The Rangemaster's equipment locker contains several standard-issue sniper rifles, but Admiral Thornfield deliberately selected the most problematic weapon available, a 20-year-old M24 sniper weapon system that had been relegated to training use after failing its last precision inspection. The rifle's barrel showed signs of excessive wear. The stock had stress fractures that affected stability, and the scope had been knocked out of zero so many times that most instructors avoided using it for serious demonstrations. "This should be adequate for your demonstrations, Staff Sergeant," Thornfield said, presenting the worn rifle with obvious satisfaction. After all, a truly competent marksman should be able to achieve results regardless of equipment limitations. Samantha accepted the rifle without comment, but her inspection of the weapon was swift and thorough. Within seconds, she had identified multiple deficiencies that would make precision shooting extremely difficult. A loose barrel mounting system, a trigger mechanism that showed signs of excessive wear, and scope mounts that had been over-torqued to the point of deformation.
This wasn't just a substandard rifle, it was equipment that had been deliberately selected to ensure failure. Staff Sergeant Mitchell and the other students watched the exchange with growing discomfort. They had worked with the M24 system before and knew its limitations when properly maintained. The rifle Samantha had been handed was in such poor condition that it would challenge even experienced marksmen to achieve basic accuracy standards. "Admiral," Colonel Foster interjected, "perhaps we should select a rifle that's in better mechanical condition. This particular weapon has some known issues that could affect the training value of the demonstration." Thornfield's response was sharp and dismissive. "Colonel, I'm perfectly capable of selecting appropriate equipment for this evaluation. If Staff Sergeant Cross is truly qualified as an instructor, she should be able to adapt to field conditions where perfect equipment isn't always available." The argument was specious and everyone present knew it. Military snipers were trained to maintain their weapons to exacting standards, precisely because precision shooting required reliable, properly functioning equipment. Forcing an instructor to use deliberately degraded equipment served no legitimate training purpose. It was simply another layer of humiliation designed to prove Thornfield's preconceived conclusions. But as Samantha continued her inspection of the rifle, her behavior began to shift in ways that caught the attention of anyone familiar with combat-experienced personnel. Her movements became more economical and precise, her breathing deeper and more controlled. The careful deference she had maintained throughout the morning was being replaced by something harder and more focused. "What's the target engagement scenario, Admiral?" she asked, her voice carrying a new edge that made everyone pay closer attention. Thornfield consulted his notes, clearly enjoying his control over the situation. "Standard precision marksmanship at 800 meters. 5 rounds, timed fire. I assume that's within your capabilities?" 800 meters was at the outer edge of the M24's effective range under ideal conditions, and far beyond what could reasonably be expected with a rifle in poor mechanical condition. The challenge was designed to be impossible, creating documented evidence of failure that Thornfield could include in his report. "800 meters with this rifle will be challenging," Samantha replied, her tone matter-of-fact rather than complaining. "What are the target specifications?" "Standard military silhouette targets. You'll have 2 minutes to engage 5 targets. Miss more than one, and I'll note in my report that this training program fails to meet Navy precision standards."
The ultimatum was delivered with the kind of finality that senior officers used when they believed they had established impossible conditions. Thornfield expected Samantha to protest, to make excuses, or to request different parameters that would give her a reasonable chance of success. What he didn't expect was her calm acceptance of terms that should have guaranteed her failure. "Understood, Admiral. I'll need a few minutes to zero this rifle and conduct pre-firing checks." "You have 5 minutes, Staff Sergeant, no more." 5 minutes was barely enough time to conduct basic safety checks, let alone properly zero a rifle that had been out of adjustment for months. But Samantha moved to the firing line with purposeful efficiency, her actions reflecting years of experience in situations where time and equipment limitations could mean the difference between success and catastrophe. The students gathered behind the firing line to observe, their professional curiosity overcoming their discomfort with the unfair nature of the challenge. They had all worked with degraded equipment in field conditions and understood the difficulty of what Samantha was attempting. Most of them expected to witness a competent instructor's failure through no fault of her own. Admiral Thornfield positioned himself directly behind Samantha's firing position, closer than safety protocols normally permitted. His proximity was deliberate intimidation, designed to add psychological pressure to the already impossible technical challenges she faced. Commander Henley and Captain Webb flanked him, their tablets ready to document what they all expected to be a demonstration of inadequate performance. As Samantha settled into her firing position, she made rapid adjustments to accommodate the rifle's deficiencies.
Her body position compensated for the loose stock, her grip adapted to the worn trigger mechanism, and her sight picture adjusted for the scope's known inconsistencies. Each modification was subtle but precise, reflecting an intimate understanding of how equipment failures affected shooting performance. "Time remaining, Staff Sergeant," Thornfield announced. 2 minutes on the clock. What happened next challenged everyone's understanding of what was possible under the circumstances. Samantha's first shot was not aimed at the designated targets downrange, but rather at a calibration target positioned at 200 meters. The shot struck precisely where she had aimed, giving her immediate feedback about the rifle's point of impact relative to her sight picture. Her second shot, again at the calibration target, confirmed the rifle's grouping characteristics and provided additional data about its ballistic performance. In less than 30 seconds, she had essentially re-zeroed a rifle that should have taken hours to properly adjust. "Staff Sergeant," Admiral said impatiently, "you're supposed to be engaging the 800-meter targets, not wasting ammunition on close-range shooting." Samantha's response was delivered without looking away from her rifle scope. "Admiral, with respect, I'm conducting necessary preparation for the assigned task." The dismissive tone was subtle but unmistakable, a departure from the careful deference she had maintained throughout the morning. Several of the students exchanged glances, recognizing signs that their instructor was transitioning from accommodation to confrontation. Thornfield stepped closer to Samantha's position, his bulk casting a shadow over her firing setup. "Staff Sergeant, I gave you specific instructions about target engagement. Are you having difficulty following orders?"
The question was loaded with implications about military discipline and subordination, but it was also a tactical error. By moving closer to assert his authority, Thornfield had positioned himself within range of someone whose combat reflexes had been fully awakened by the confrontational situation. Samantha looked up from her rifle scope, her eyes meeting Thornfield's with an intensity that made him unconsciously step back. "Admiral, I understand your instructions perfectly, but I need you to move to a safe observation position before I continue." "I'll stand wherever I choose to stand, Staff Sergeant." "No, sir, you won't." The quiet certainty in Samantha's voice carried implications that everyone present recognized but that Thornfield was too arrogant to heed. His next move was the catalyst that transformed a professional disagreement into something far more serious. Thornfield reached towards Samantha's rifle, intending to physically demonstrate his authority over both the weapon and its operator. "Perhaps I should conduct this demonstration myself, since you seem to be having difficulty following simple instructions." What happened next took less than 2 seconds, but would be replayed in the minds of everyone present for years to come. As Thornfield's hand approached her rifle, Samantha moved with the fluid precision of someone whose survival had once depended on instantaneous responses to physical threats. Her left hand intercepted Thornfield's reaching arm, her grip finding the precise pressure point that controlled his wrist mobility. Simultaneously, she pivoted from her prone firing position into a controlled combat stance, using Thornfield's forward momentum and body weight against him. The technique was a textbook application of close-quarters combat training, executed with professional precision but devastating effectiveness. Admiral Thornfield found himself face down on the ground with his right shoulder dislocated and his arm twisted behind his back in a position that made movement impossible. The entire sequence had been executed so smoothly that most observers didn't fully understand what they had witnessed until they saw the Admiral's helpless position and heard his sharp intake of breath that indicated significant pain. "Staff Sergeant Cross," Colonel Foster shouted, her voice mixing shock with concern for the implications of what had just occurred. Samantha maintained her control position over Thornfield for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to ensure that he understood the seriousness of his situation, but brief enough to avoid charges of excessive force. Then she released her grip and stepped back,
her hands raised to show that she posed no continuing threat. Admiral Thornfield attempted to interfere with a weapon during a live-fire exercise, she reported formally. I responded with appropriate force to prevent a safety violation. The explanation was technically accurate and reflected genuine safety concerns, but everyone present understood that much more had just occurred. Samantha had not simply prevented a safety violation, she had demonstrated capabilities that went far beyond those of a routine marksmanship instructor, and she had done so against the highest-ranking officer present. As Commander Henley and Captain Webb moved to assist their superior, Admiral Thornfield struggled to regain his composure while dealing with the intense pain of his dislocated shoulder. His face was flushed with humiliation and rage, but his injury prevented him from immediately retaliating against the subordinate who had just taught him a lesson he would never forget.
The silence that followed Admiral Thornfield's incapacitation stretched for nearly 10 seconds, broken only by his labored breathing and the distant sound of training activities from other parts of the facility. Everyone present was processing what they had just witnessed. A female NCO had just physically dominated a flag officer using techniques that suggested combat experience far beyond what her official position indicated. Colonel Foster was the first to break the paralysis, her command training overriding her shock at the unprecedented situation. Medic, she called, though her voice carried more professional necessity than genuine concern for Thornfield's condition. The Admiral's injury was serious, but not life-threatening, and Foster's primary worry was managing the political implications of what had just occurred. Commander Henley knelt beside Thornfield, her medical training from her early Navy career allowing her to assess the situation quickly. Admiral, your shoulder is dislocated. We need to get you to the base medical facility immediately. Thornfield's response was a mixture of pain and fury, his voice strained but still carrying the authority of rank. Negative. I'm not leaving until this demonstration is completed. That's an order. The decision was tactically unsound and medically inadvisable, but it was also characteristic of an officer whose pride had been wounded more severely than his shoulder. Thornfield was not going to allow a subordinate's act of defiance to end his inspection without consequences. Captain Webb looked uncertainly between his injured superior and Colonel Foster, unsure whether to document what had just occurred or to pretend it hadn't happened for the sake of everyone's careers. Admiral, perhaps we should postpone the demonstration until you've received medical attention. The demonstration will continue as scheduled, Thornfield said through gritted teeth. Staff Sergeant Cross wanted to show us her competence. Let her prove it. Samantha had remained at the firing line throughout the exchange, her demeanor calm and professional despite having just assaulted an flag officer in front of multiple witnesses. She continued her preparation of the degraded M24 rifle with methodical precision, as if physical confrontations with senior officers were routine aspects of her instructional duties. Staff Sergeant Mitchell approached her position, his voice low enough to avoid being overheard by the official party. Cross, are you sure about this? You just put an admiral on the ground. Maybe it's time to call this off. Samantha's response was delivered without looking away from her weapon. Mitchell, he challenged my competence and confiscated my equipment. Now he wants a demonstration. He's going to get one. The quiet determination in her voice carried implications that made Mitchell step back. He had served with enough special operations personnel to recognize the signs of someone transitioning from defensive to offensive mindset, and what he saw in Samantha's bearing suggested that Admiral Thornfield had awakened capabilities that went far beyond routine marksmanship instruction. The base medic arrived and began treating Thornfield's dislocated shoulder, working around his refusal to be evacuated. The procedure was painful and undignified, requiring him to remain seated on the ground while his arm was manipulated back into joint alignment. Throughout the treatment, his eyes remained fixed on Samantha with an intensity that promised severe consequences once the demonstration was completed. Admiral, the medic said after completing the reduction, you need to immobilize this shoulder and avoid any strenuous activity. I strongly recommend immediate transport to the hospital for x-rays and proper evaluation.
"I'll be fine," Thornfield said, struggling to his feet with assistance from Commander Henley. His right arm was now secured in a sling, and his face was pale from pain and exertion, but his determination to see the demonstration through remained undiminished. Colonel Foster made one final attempt to defuse the situation. "Admiral, given the circumstances, perhaps we should postpone this demonstration for a later date. Staff Sergeant Cross can conduct a proper demonstration when conditions are more appropriate. The demonstration will proceed immediately. That's a direct order." Foster nodded reluctantly, recognizing that further protests would only escalate an already volatile situation. She moved to the observation area with the rest of the official party, positioning herself where she could intervene if necessary, but hoping that professional discipline would prevent further incidents. Samantha finished her equipment checks and moved to the firing line, the degraded M24 rifle looking almost primitive compared to the Barrett that had been confiscated earlier. The targets at 800 meters were barely visible to the naked eye, appearing as small dark rectangles against the distant backstop. Under normal circumstances, engaging them would require careful preparation, multiple ranging shots, and ideal environmental conditions.
The circumstances were far from normal. Samantha was no longer conducting routine training. She was proving a point that had been building since Admiral Thornfield's first condescending comment. The quiet instructor who had been trying to blend into garrison life had been replaced by the combat sniper who had never accepted limits imposed by others' expectations. "Range is hot," she announced, following standard safety protocols despite the hostile atmosphere. "All personnel behind the firing line." The students gathered in the observation area, their professional curiosity overcoming their discomfort with the confrontational situation. They had worked with Samantha for weeks and respected her knowledge, but none of them had seen her actually shoot under pressure. The challenge she faced, engaging multiple targets at extreme range with degraded equipment while under hostile scrutiny, would test capabilities that few marksmen possessed. Admiral Thornfield positioned himself as close to the firing line as safety regulations permitted, his injured arm preventing him from assuming his preferred intimidating stance, but his presence still carried the weight of authority and expectation. "Staff Sergeant, you claim this rifle would be adequate for demonstration purposes. Prove it." Samantha settled into her firing position with fluid economy of movement, her body adapting to the rifle's deficiencies through subtle adjustments that reflected years of experience with imperfect equipment. Her breathing became deeper and more controlled, her heart rate slowing as she entered the focus state that combat snipers called the zone. "Time starts now," Thornfield announced. 2 minutes, 5 targets. Demonstrate your supposed competence." What happened next would be discussed and analyzed for years afterward by everyone who witnessed it. Instead of carefully aiming and firing individual shots at each target, Samantha began engaging them in rapid sequence, her bolt manipulation and target acquisition flowing together with mechanical precision. The first shot cracked across the range and struck the leftmost target center mass, the impact clearly visible through the spotting scopes that the students were using to observe. Before the first target had stopped moving from the bullet's impact, Samantha had already cycled the bolt and was engaging the second target. The second shot, the third, the fourth, each one struck its intended target with precision that should have been impossible under the conditions. The degraded rifle that had been selected to ensure her failure was performing like a precision instrument in her hands, its mechanical deficiencies overcome through shooting techniques that defied conventional understanding. Staff Sergeant Mitchell lowered his spotting scope, his expression reflecting disbelief at what he was observing. "That's not possible. That rifle hasn't been zeroed in months. The scoot launts are loose. She shouldn't be hitting anything at that distance." But the evidence was undeniable. 4 targets had been engaged in less than 90 seconds, each one marked by precise center mass hits that demonstrated marksmanship capabilities far beyond what any of them had expected from their instructor. Samantha's 5th shot was delivered with the same mechanical precision as the previous 4, but this time she held her position after firing, maintaining her sight picture and breathing control while observing the target through her scope. The shot had struck center mass like the others, but something in her posture suggested that she wasn't finished with the demonstration. "Time," Admiral Thornfield called, his voice carrying grudging acknowledgement of what he had witnessed while maintaining his hostile attitude. "Acceptable performance, Staff Sergeant.
though hardly exceptional given the resources invested in this program. Samantha's response would define the remainder of her military career and establish her reputation throughout the special operations community. Instead of accepting the backhanded compliment and ending the demonstration, she remained in her firing position and spoke without looking away from her scope. "Admiral, you said 5 targets in 2 minutes. I completed that requirement with 30 seconds to spare. But you also mentioned wanting to see real competence rather than dependence on equipment." She paused, making a subtle adjustment to her scope settings that suggested she was transitioning to a different type of engagement. "Would you like to see what actual competence looks like?" The challenge was delivered with quiet confidence that made everyone present pay closer attention. Thornfield had gotten the demonstration he had demanded, but Samantha was offering something more, a display of capabilities that would either validate her position as an instructor or end her military career depending on the outcome.
Admiral Thornfield's response was immediate and hostile, his injured pride overriding any tactical sense about escalating a confrontation with someone who had already demonstrated superior physical capabilities. "Staff Sergeant, you've completed the assigned demonstration. I suggest you secure your weapon and prepare for the disciplinary proceedings that will follow your assault on a superior officer." But Colonel Foster, who had been observing Samantha's transformation throughout the morning, made a decision that surprised everyone present. "Admiral, with respect, I think we should see what Staff Sergeant Cross is proposing. This evaluation was designed to assess our training capabilities, and we haven't seen the full extent of what this program can achieve." The intervention was professionally phrased but politically risky. Foster was essentially overruling a flag officer's desire to end the demonstration, potentially jeopardizing her own career to protect an instructor whose background she understood better than anyone else present. Thornfield's face darkened with anger, but his position was complicated by the official nature of his evaluation mission. He had come to Fort Bragg to assess training effectiveness, and ending the demonstration prematurely could be seen as failing to conduct a thorough review. "Very well, Colonel, but I'm holding you personally responsible for whatever happens next." Samantha had used the brief exchange to make additional adjustments to her rifle and scope settings, compensating for wind conditions and environmental factors that would affect long-range accuracy. Her movements were economical and precise, reflecting years of experience in situations where equipment preparation could mean the difference between success and failure. "Admiral," she said, still maintaining her firing position, "you mentioned wanting to see competence that doesn't depend on specialized equipment. The demonstration you just observed was conducted under artificial constraints, designed to ensure failure. Would you like to see what's possible when those constraints are removed?" The question was both a challenge and an offer, delivered with professional courtesy that couldn't quite conceal the underlying confidence that had emerged since her physical confrontation with Thornfield. "Explain what you're proposing, Staff Sergeant." Samantha gestured toward the target range, where additional target systems had been positioned at various distances and angles. 20 targets at ranges from 600 to 1,200 meters, mixed target types including stationary, moving, and partially concealed, single-shot engagement, no ranging rounds, no corrections, demonstration of precision marksmanship techniques under realistic field conditions. Staff Sergeant Mitchell exchanged glances with the other students, their expressions reflecting professional skepticism about what Samantha was proposing. 20 targets at extended range was an extraordinary challenge under ideal conditions, and she was offering to engage them with a rifle that had been deliberately selected for its poor condition. "That's impossible," one of the students muttered. "The rifle she's using can't hold that kind of precision. The scope mounts are loose, the barrel is worn, and she hasn't had time to properly zero the system." But other students who had worked more closely with Samantha were beginning to recognize signs that their instructor possessed capabilities they had never suspected. Her handling of the rifle had evolved throughout the morning from competent to exceptional, and her confidence suggested experience that went far beyond routine training activities. Admiral Thornfield's calculation was simple.
Accepting the challenge would give him 20 opportunities to document Samantha's failure, creating overwhelming evidence for his report about the inadequacy of current training standards. Even if she succeeded with half the targets, he could argue that a 50% failure rate proved his point about declining military competence. Proceed with your demonstration, Staff Sergeant, but understand that failure to achieve the standards you're claiming will result in immediate termination of this program and formal charges for your earlier assault. The ultimatum was designed to create psychological pressure that would degrade Samantha's performance, but it had the opposite effect. Instead of increasing her stress level, the high stakes clarified her focus and activated instincts that had been dormant since her return from Afghanistan. Understood, Admiral. Range is hot. All personnel maintain safe positions. What happened over the following 10 minutes would be analyzed and discussed throughout the military community for years afterward. Samantha began engaging targets with mechanical precision, her bolt manipulation and target acquisition flowing together in seamless sequence. Each shot was delivered with deliberate timing, accounting for wind variations, target movement, and the rifle's mechanical inconsistencies.
The first target was a stationary silhouette at 600 meters. The shot struck center mass with authority that sent the target spinning on its mounting system. Before it had completed its rotation, Samantha had already identified and engaged the second target, a moving silhouette at 750 meters, that was traversing from left to right at walking speed. The moving target presented a significantly greater challenge, requiring precise lead calculations and timing that accounted for both target movement and bullet flight time. Samantha's shot intercepted the target at the midpoint of its traverse, the impact stopping its movement and indicating a perfect center mass hit. Target 3 was partially concealed behind a barrier at 850 meters, with only a small portion of the silhouette visible through a gap in the obstacle. The precision required for such a shot demanded not only accurate distance estimation, but also the ability to identify the exact aiming point that would result in a disabling hit on the concealed target. Samantha's third shot found its mark with precision that drew audible reactions from the observing students. The bullet struck the visible portion of the target exactly where it needed to for maximum effectiveness, demonstrating an understanding of target anatomy and ballistic performance that went far beyond basic marksmanship training. By the time she had engaged her 10th target, the pattern of her performance had become undeniable. Each shot was delivered with mechanical precision, accounting for variables that shouldn't have been manageable with the degraded equipment she was using. The rifle that had been selected to ensure her failure was performing like a precision instrument, its deficiencies overcome through shooting techniques that defied conventional understanding. Admiral Thornfield watched through his binoculars with growing discomfort, his confidence in the demonstration's outcome beginning to waver. The performance he was witnessing exceeded anything he had encountered during his 30-year career, even among the Navy's most elite special operations personnel. Commander Henley lowered her own binoculars after Samantha's 15th shot found its mark. "Admiral, her accuracy rate is 100%. She hasn't missed a single target." "I can see that, Commander," Thornfield replied tersely, his voice carrying frustration and growing concern about the implications of what he was documenting. The remaining 5 targets represented the most challenging engagements, long-range shots at distances exceeding 1,000 meters, with targets that were both moving and partially concealed. These were shots that would challenge Olympic-level marksmen using precision equipment under ideal conditions. Samantha's 16th shot engaged a target at 1,050 meters that was moving laterally behind partial concealment. The shot required precise timing to catch the target during the brief moment when it was fully exposed, combined with accurate lead calculation for the lateral movement. Her bullet struck the target dead center during its moment of maximum exposure. Target 17 was stationary but positioned at 1,150 meters, near the maximum effective range of the M24 system under ideal conditions. At that distance, environmental factors became critical, with wind variations and atmospheric conditions significantly affecting bullet trajectory. Samantha's shot compensated for all variables perfectly, striking the distant target with authority that confirmed her mastery of advanced ballistic principles.
The 18th and 19th targets were engaged in rapid succession, both moving targets at different ranges that required split-second timing and precise lead calculations. Samantha's shots found their marks with mechanical precision, her performance maintaining its perfect accuracy rate despite the increasing complexity of the challenges. The 20th and final target represented the ultimate test of her capabilities, a moving target at 1,200 meters, traversing behind partial concealment at an angle that made accurate lead calculation extremely difficult. The shot required not only perfect distance estimation and wind compensation, but also the ability to predict the exact moment when the target would be vulnerable during its movement cycle. Samantha's final shot was delivered after a longer pause than the previous 19, her breathing deep and controlled as she calculated the multiple variables that would determine success or failure. When she finally fired, the shot seemed to hang in the air for an eternity before striking the distant target with precision that brought absolute silence to the observation area. 20 targets, 20 hits. Perfect accuracy under conditions that should have guaranteed failure with equipment that had been selected to ensure her humiliation. As Samantha cleared her rifle and secured the weapon, the silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Everyone present was processing what they had witnessed, a display of marksmanship that transcended normal human capabilities and suggested training and experience that went far beyond what any of them had imagined. Admiral Thornfield was the first to break the science, his voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and grudging recognition of what he had witnessed. Staff Sergeant Cross, where exactly did you learn to shoot like that?
Samantha's response to Admiral Thornfield's question was measured and professional, despite the extraordinary performance she had just delivered. Sir, I received my initial marksmanship training through standard military programs, supplemented by extensive field experience during my deployments. The answer was technically accurate but deliberately incomplete, offering just enough information to satisfy protocol while avoiding details that might lead to uncomfortable questions about classified operations. But everyone present understood that what they had witnessed went far beyond anything that could be explained by routine training and deployment experience. Staff Sergeant Mitchell was the first to find his voice among the students, his professional experience allowing him to articulate what everyone was thinking. Cross, I've worked with some of the best marksmen in special operations. What you just did, that's not normal training. That's something else entirely. The comment hung in the air like an accusation and a compliment simultaneously. Mitchell's credentials as a Green Beret sniper gave his assessment considerable weight, and his obvious amazement at Samantha's performance suggested that he recognized capabilities that exceeded even elite military standards. Colonel Foster moved closer to the group, her expression reflecting a mixture of pride and concern about the implications of what had just occurred. She was one of the few people present who had access to classified portions of Samantha's service record and understood the morning's events had essentially declassified capabilities that were supposed to remain hidden. Admiral, Foster said carefully, I think this demonstration has provided a comprehensive assessment of our training program's effectiveness. Perhaps we should move to a more private setting to discuss the implications. But Admiral Thornfield was not ready to let the matter drop. His professional curiosity had been aroused by a performance that challenged his understanding of human capabilities, and his injured pride demanded answers that would explain how he had been so thoroughly outmaneuvered by someone he had dismissed as incompetent. Staff Sergeant Cross, your personnel file indicates 3 deployments to Afghanistan in support roles. Which unit were you assigned to, and what was the nature of your duties? The question was legitimate from a flag officer conducting an official evaluation, but it was also dangerous territory for someone whose actual service history included operations that didn't officially exist. Samantha's deployments had indeed been to Afghanistan, but her role had been far more complex than the sanitized version that appeared in her unclassified personnel records. Sir, I served with various units conducting security and support operations. My specific assignments are detailed in my classified service record, which would require appropriate clearance levels to access. Commander Henley looked up from her tablet, where she had been reviewing Samantha's available personnel information. Admiral, Staff Sergeant Cross's classified records are compartmentalized at levels that exceed our current access. The details of her service history would require special authorization to review.
The bureaucratic obstacle was frustrating, but not surprising. Military personnel with sensitive operational histories often had service records that were compartmentalized to protect both national security and the individuals involved. But the level of classification surrounding Samantha's background suggested involvement in operations that went far beyond routine support duties. Captain Webb had been documenting the entire demonstration for his official report, but he was now facing the challenge of describing a performance that defied conventional explanation. Admiral, how do you want me to characterize what we just observed? The accuracy rate was 100% under conditions that should have made success impossible. The question highlighted the dilemma that everyone present was grappling with. They had witnessed something extraordinary, but explaining it in official channels would require acknowledging capabilities that might raise uncomfortable questions about how those capabilities had been acquired and why they had been concealed. Admiral Thornfield's next decision would have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. Instead of accepting the demonstration as evidence of exceptional training effectiveness and moving on, his need to understand what he had witnessed drove him to escalate his investigation. Commander Henley, contact the Pentagon and request a comprehensive review of Staff Sergeant Cross's complete service record. I want access to everything: classified operations, special assignments, training records, and performance evaluations. Use my personal authorization codes if necessary. The request was both legitimate and dangerous. Thornfield had the authority to request detailed personnel information for his evaluation report, but he was also opening doors that had been deliberately kept closed for operational security reasons.
Colonel Foster felt a chill of concern as she realized the implications of Thornfield's investigation. Admiral, some classified records have compartmentalization levels that require specific justification for access. Opening those files might trigger security reviews that could complicate our personnel assignments. Admiral, I'm conducting an official evaluation of training effectiveness for the Pentagon. If Staff Sergeant Cross has capabilities that exceed normal parameters, I need to understand how those capabilities were developed and whether they represent assets that are being underutilized in her current assignment. The logic was sound from an administrative perspective, but Foster understood that Samantha's background contained elements that were supposed to remain hidden for very good reasons. Her transition to a training role had been specifically designed to provide her with a quiet assignment where her exceptional abilities wouldn't attract attention. Samantha herself had remained silent throughout the discussion of her service record, but her body language suggested growing tension as the conversation moved into areas that she had hoped to avoid. The quiet instructor persona she had maintained for 18 months was being systematically dismantled by questions that she couldn't answer without revealing information that was supposed to remain classified. Admiral, she said finally, if you're requesting access to my classified service record, I should inform you that some of that information is subject to operational security restrictions that may prevent its disclosure even to authorized personnel. The warning was professionally delivered but carried implications that everyone present understood. Samantha was essentially telling a flag officer that there were aspects of her background that even he might not be authorized to know, a suggestion that indicated involvement in operations at the highest levels of classification. Thornfield's response revealed both his arrogance and his fundamental misunderstanding of the situation he was creating. Staff Sergeant, I'm a flag officer with 30 years of service and clearances that exceed anything you've encountered. There's nothing in your background that I'm not authorized to access. The claim was almost certainly false, but it also demonstrated Thornfield's determination to get answers regardless of the potential consequences. His injured pride and professional curiosity had combined to create a dangerous situation that threatened to expose operations and personnel that were supposed to remain hidden. Over the following hour, as the official party waited for responses to Thornfield's information requests, the dynamics among the personnel present continued to evolve. The students who had observed Samantha's demonstration were processing what they had witnessed, their respect for their instructor now mixed with curiosity about capabilities that clearly exceeded their own despite their elite training. Staff Sergeant Mitchell approached Samantha during a brief break in the proceedings, his voice low enough to avoid being overheard by the official party. Cross, I don't know what your real background is, but that demonstration was unlike anything I've seen. If you ever want to talk about deployments or operational experience, I've been there too.
The offer was both professional courtesy and recognition of shared experience, acknowledging that Samantha's performance suggested combat history that went beyond what appeared in her official records. Mitchell's own background in special operations gave him insight into the kind of training and experience that could produce such extraordinary capabilities. But Samantha's response was carefully neutral, maintaining the professional distance that she had cultivated since returning from overseas. "I appreciate the offer, Mitchell, but I'm focused on my current assignment and responsibilities here at Fort Bragg." The deflection was polite but firm, indicating that she had no intention of discussing her background even with someone who might understand the realities of special operations work. Her commitment to maintaining operational security went beyond formal requirements to include personal discipline that had been reinforced through years of high-stakes missions. As the afternoon progressed, responses to Thornfield's information requests began arriving through secure channels. The initial reports confirmed what Foster had suspected. Samantha's classified service record contained compartmentalized information that required special authorization to access, and several aspects of her operational history were classified at levels that even Admiral Thornfield's clearances couldn't penetrate without specific justification. The bureaucratic obstacles should have ended Thornfield's investigation, but his determination to understand what he had witnessed drove him to escalate his requests through channels that would eventually reach the highest levels of military and intelligence command. He was about to discover that some questions were dangerous to ask and that some personnel had backgrounds that were protected by more than just classification levels. What Admiral Thornfield didn't yet realize was that his investigation of Staff Sergeant Samantha Cross would soon attract attention from people who specialized in keeping certain operations and personnel hidden from official scrutiny, and that his desire for answers would ultimately provide him with far more information than he was prepared to handle.
The secure phone call that changed everything came at 1847 hours, just as Admiral Thornfield was reviewing the initial responses to his personnel record requests. The caller identified himself as Deputy Director Marcus Kane from the Defense Intelligence Agency, and his tone carried the kind of authority that made flag officers pay attention regardless of their own rank and seniority. "Admiral Thornfield, I understand you've been making inquiries about Staff Sergeant Samantha Cross's service record. I need you to cease all such requests immediately and report to my office at 0800 tomorrow for a comprehensive briefing." The order was delivered with absolute finality, leaving no room for negotiation or protest. Thornfield's response reflected both his confusion and his growing realization that he had stumbled into something far more complex than a routine personnel evaluation. "Deputy Director, I'm conducting an authorized assessment of training effectiveness. Staff Sergeant Cross's capabilities appear to exceed normal parameters, and I need to understand how those capabilities were developed." Kane's next statement would fundamentally alter Thornfield's understanding of what he had witnessed at Fort Bragg. "Admiral, Staff Sergeant Cross is a former member of a classified special operations unit that doesn't officially exist. Her training and operational experience are compartmentalized at levels that require presidential authorization to access. Your requests have triggered security protocols that I'm now required to implement." The revelation struck Thornfield like a physical blow. His assumptions about Samantha's background had been based on her quiet demeanor and unassuming position as a training instructor, but Kane's statement suggested involvement in operations at the highest levels of national security. Meanwhile, in her quarters at Fort Bragg, Samantha was dealing with her own crisis as the carefully constructed facade of her post-military life began to crumble. The phone call from her former handler, Agent Jennifer Stone, had been brief but devastating in its implications. "Viper, your cover has been compromised, and Admiral Thornfield has been asking questions that have reached the wrong people. We need to discuss your options immediately." The use of her operational call sign after 18 months of civilian identity brought back memories that Samantha had been working to suppress since her return from Afghanistan. Agent Stone had been her primary contact during her years as an operational asset, coordinating missions that had taken her into the darkest corners of the global war on terror. "Stone, I thought this was over. I completed my service, took my discharge, and followed all protocols for transitioning to inactive status. I've been teaching marksmanship to conventional forces for a year and a half without incident." "The situation has changed, Sam.
Your demonstration today was witnessed by personnel who have the clearance and connections to ask the right questions in the wrong places. Deputy Director Kane is flying in from Langley to conduct damage assessment and determine whether your operational security has been irreparably compromised. The implications were clear and terrifying. Samantha's transition to civilian life had been predicated on maintaining a low profile that wouldn't attract attention from either hostile intelligence services or curious military officials. Her confrontation with Admiral Thornfield had shattered that anonymity and potentially exposed operations that were supposed to remain hidden indefinitely. Agent Stone's next revelation provided context that explained both Samantha's extraordinary capabilities and the extreme sensitivity surrounding her background. Sam, I need to brief you on developments in your operational theater that occurred after your extraction. 3 of the assets you developed in Afghanistan have been compromised and killed. 2 safe houses you established have been discovered and raided. Someone with detailed knowledge of your methods and operational patterns has been systematically dismantling the networks you built. The news struck Samantha with the force of personal betrayal. The assets Stone mentioned had been Afghan nationals who had risked their lives to provide intelligence that had saved American lives and disrupted terrorist operations. Their deaths weren't just operational setbacks, they were personal failures that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Who's responsible? Do we have any intelligence on the source of the compromises? Stone's answer provided the final piece of a puzzle that Samantha had been unconsciously avoiding since her return from Afghanistan. We believe it's someone with intimate knowledge of your operational methods and personal characteristics, someone who worked closely with you and understood both your capabilities and your psychological profile. The implication was devastating. Samantha was being hunted by someone from her own operational past, someone who knew her well enough to systematically destroy the network she had spent years building. Her decision to maintain a low profile hadn't just been about transitioning to civilian life, it had been about staying alive while hostile intelligence services searched for the operative known as Viper.
That evening, as Samantha prepared for what might be her final night as a training instructor, she allowed herself to remember the events that had shaped her into the person who could deliver 20 perfect shots under impossible conditions. Her story began not with military service, but with a childhood trauma that had awakened instincts and abilities that would eventually be channeled into service to her country. At age 12, Samantha had witnessed her parents' murder during a home invasion in rural Montana. The attackers had been members of a white supremacist group targeting her father, a federal prosecutor who had been building cases against domestic terrorist organizations. Young Samantha had hidden in a closet during the attack, but she had also observed everything through crack in the door, memorizing faces, voices, and details that would later help law enforcement identify and prosecute the killers. But the trauma had also awakened something else in Samantha, an almost supernatural ability to remain calm under extreme stress, combined with enhanced observational skills and reaction times that exceeded normal human parameters. Military psychologists would later classify her condition as a rare form of post-traumatic adaptation that enhanced rather than impaired cognitive and physical performance. Her recruitment into military service had been orchestrated by intelligence officials who specialized in identifying individuals with exceptional capabilities that could be developed for special operations. Her training had been conducted in facilities that didn't appear on any official records, using techniques that pushed human performance beyond conventional limitations. The operations she had conducted in Afghanistan were classified at levels that prevented most military officials from even knowing they had occurred. Working alone or with minimal support, she had penetrated terrorist networks, eliminated high-value targets, and gathered intelligence that had prevented dozens of attacks against American forces and civilians. Her longest confirmed kill shot, the 2,847-meter elimination that had saved an entire platoon, had been delivered under combat conditions that made her demonstration at Fort Bragg seem routine by comparison. The target had been a terrorist sniper who had been systematically eliminating American personnel from a position that conventional forces couldn't approach or neutralize. Samantha's shot had been calculated and executed under conditions that included high winds, extreme elevation changes, and hostile fire from multiple positions.
The elimination had been so precise and occurred at such impossible range that enemy forces had initially attributed it to divine intervention rather than human marksmanship. But the psychological cost of such operations had been enormous. Each mission had required her to suppress normal human emotions and moral considerations in service of larger strategic objectives. The transition back to civilian life had been complicated by post-traumatic stress that manifested not as traditional anxiety or depression, but as hypervigilance and emotional numbing that made normal social interactions almost impossible. Her assignment to Fort Bragg's training center had been specifically designed to provide her with meaningful work that utilized her skills without requiring the moral compromises that had characterized her operational career. Teaching marksmanship to conventional forces allowed her to pass on potentially life-saving skills while maintaining the emotional distance that her psychological recovery required. But Admiral Thornfield's investigation had shattered that carefully constructed sanctuary, forcing her to confront both her operational past and the ongoing threats that she had hoped to escape through her transition to garrison life. As she lay in her quarters that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the distant sounds of base activity, Samantha realized that her 18-month respite from the shadow world of special operations was ending. The quiet instructor who had been trying to blend into routine military life was about to be replaced once again by the operative known as Viper, whether she wanted that transformation or not. The morning would bring Deputy Director Kane's briefing, Admiral Thornfield's education about the realities of classified operations, and decisions that would determine whether Samantha Cross could continue to exist or whether she would have to disappear entirely to protect operations and personnel that remained active in the field. But tonight, for perhaps the last time, she could pretend to be nothing more than a marksmanship instructor whose biggest challenge was teaching conventional soldiers to hit targets at routine distances under controlled conditions. Tomorrow would bring the return of a world where every shot mattered, every decision carried life or death consequences, and where the exceptional abilities were measured in ways that most people could never understand.
The briefing room at Fort Bragg had been transformed overnight into a secure facility that bore no resemblance to its usual function as a routine conference space. Electronic countermeasures hummed quietly in the corners, blocking any possibility of surveillance or recording. Armed security personnel stood at strategic positions, their presence indicating that whatever was about to be discussed operated at classification levels that most military personnel would never encounter. Deputy Director Marcus Kane arrived precisely at 0800, accompanied by two individuals whose civilian clothes and professional demeanor marked them as intelligence operatives of considerable seniority. Kane himself was a compact man in his 50s, whose unremarkable appearance concealed decades of experience in the shadow world of special operations and covert activities. Admiral Thornfield entered the room with obvious reluctance, his injured shoulders still immobilized and his expression reflecting a mixture of curiosity and growing apprehension about what he was about to learn. His aide, Commander Henley, had been excluded from the briefing, leaving him to face whatever revelations awaited without the buffer of subordinate personnel. Colonel Foster was present as the senior Army representative, her security clearances allowing her access to information that would be denied to most officers of her rank. Her expression was carefully neutral, but those who knew her well might have detected signs of concern about the implications for her facility and personnel. Samantha entered last, escorted by Agent Stone, whose presence confirmed the seriousness of the security breach that Thornfield's investigation had created. Samantha's demeanor had undergone another subtle transformation overnight, the careful deference of a training instructor replaced by the controlled alertness of an operational asset who understood that her future was being decided by people whose priorities might not align with her personal welfare. Deputy Director Kane opened the briefing without preliminary courtesies, his tone reflecting the gravity of the situation that Thornfield's curiosity had unleashed. Admiral, your investigation into Staff Sergeant Cross's background has compromised operational security at levels that threaten ongoing missions and personnel who remain active in the field. Thornfield's response reflected both his confusion and his growing realization that his routine personnel evaluation had escalated into something far beyond his understanding. Deputy Director, I was simply trying to understand how someone with Staff Sergeant Cross's apparent capabilities ended up in a routine training assignment. Kane's next statement would fundamentally alter Thornfield's perspective on military service and the hidden realities of national security operations. Admiral, Staff Sergeant Cross spent 4 years as our most effective deep penetration asset in Afghanistan. Operating under the call sign Viper, she conducted 47 classified missions that resulted in the elimination of high-value targets, the disruption of terrorist networks, and the gathering of intelligence that prevented dozens of attacks against American forces. The statistics were delivered with clinical precision, but their implications were staggering. Samantha had been responsible for operations that had saved hundreds of American lives while operating in conditions that made her demonstration at Fort Bragg seem routine by comparison. Her longest confirmed elimination was conducted at 2,847 meters under combat conditions that included hostile fire, extreme wind variations, and target movement that required calculations beyond normal human capability. The shot prevented a terrorist sniper from eliminating an entire platoon that had been pinned down for 18 hours without possibility of conventional rescue. Admiral Thornfield's expression reflected his struggle to reconcile these revelations with his preconceived notions about the quiet instructor he had attempted to humiliate. His assumptions about gender roles and military capabilities were being systematically dismantled by information that challenged his fundamental understanding of what human beings could accomplish under extreme conditions. Agent Stone continued the briefing with information that explained both Samantha's current situation and the dangers that Thornfield's investigation had created. Viper's operational effectiveness was based on her ability to remain undetected by hostile intelligence services. Her transition to a training role at Fort Bragg was designed to provide her with meaningful work while maintaining the low profile necessary for her continued safety. Kane's next revelation provided the context that explained why Samantha's exposure represented more than just a personnel security issue. 3 assets that Viper developed during her operational career have been systematically eliminated over the past 6 months. 2 safe houses she established have been compromised and raided. We believe she's being hunted by someone with detailed knowledge of her operational methods and personal characteristics.
The implication was clear and terrifying. Samantha's confrontation with Admiral Thornfield had potentially provided hostile intelligence services with information that could be used to locate and eliminate one of America's most valuable intelligence assets. Thornfield's next question reflected his growing understanding of the magnitude of his error. What are the consequences of my investigation? Have I compromised Staff Sergeant Cross's safety or ongoing operations? Kane's response was measured but ominous. Your requests triggered automated security protocols that generated electronic signatures detectable by sophisticated intelligence services. If hostile assets were monitoring communication patterns for information about Viper, your inquiries may have provided them with the confirmation they needed to locate her. The briefing continued with a comprehensive review of Samantha's operational history, each revelation adding layers of complexity to Thornfield's understanding of what he had witnessed at the firing range. Her capabilities weren't just exceptional, they were the result of training and experience that had pushed human performance beyond conventional limitations. Her psychological profile revealed the personal costs of such operations, post-traumatic adaptations that enhanced her combat effectiveness while making normal social interactions nearly impossible. Hypervigilance that had kept her alive in hostile territory but made garrison life a constant challenge, and emotional numbing that protected her from the psychological impact of her missions while isolating her from normal human connections. But the most sobering revelation concerned the ongoing threats that made her continued exposure dangerous for both herself and the personnel around her. Intelligence reports indicated that at least 3 hostile intelligence services had active operations designed to identify and eliminate American Special Operations personnel who had conducted missions in their operational theaters. Kane's conclusion was delivered with the kind of finality that characterized decisions made at the highest levels of national security.
Admiral, Staff Sergeant Cross can no longer maintain her current assignment. Her operational cover has been irreparably compromised by your investigation, and her continued presence at Fort Bragg represents an unacceptable risk to both herself and the personnel around her. The options presented to Samantha were limited and stark. Return to active operational status under deep cover, accept relocation to a secure facility where her presence wouldn't endanger others, or disappear entirely into a witness protection program that would end her military career and separate her from everyone she had known. Admiral Thornfield's final question reflected his belated understanding of the human cost of his arrogance and prejudice. What happens to Staff Sergeant Cross now? Is there anything I can do to mitigate the consequences of my actions? Kane's response was professional and personal, acknowledging the irreversible nature of what had occurred. Admiral, Staff Sergeant Cross will be relocated within 72 hours to a secure facility where her safety can be maintained while we assess the full extent of the security breach. Her career as a training instructor is over, and her future options are limited by the realities of the threat she now faces. But Samantha's own response surprised everyone in the room, reflecting a decision that she had reached during her sleepless night of contemplation. Deputy Director, I request return to active operational status. If my cover has been compromised and hostile services are looking for me, then hiding accomplishes nothing. I'd rather face those threats on my own terms than spend the rest of my life running from them. The statement was delivered with quiet conviction that reminded everyone present why she had been so effective in her operational role. Despite the personal costs and ongoing dangers, she was choosing to return to the world that had shaped her into someone who could deliver impossible shots under conditions that would break most people. Kane's final decision would define the remainder of Samantha's career and determine whether Admiral Thornfield's investigation would result in the loss of one of America's most valuable intelligence assets. Request approved. Agent Stone will coordinate your reactivation and deployment to operational theater within 1 week. As the briefing concluded and personnel began to disperse, Admiral Thornfield approached Samantha for what he understood would be their final interaction. His words reflected both his regret and his newfound respect for capabilities that he had nearly destroyed through his prejudice and arrogance. Staff Sergeant Cross, I owe you an apology that no words can adequately express. My actions were based on assumptions and prejudices that have no place in military service. You deserve better from the leadership you've served so faithfully. Samantha's response was measured and professional, reflecting the discipline that had carried her through years of impossible missions. Admiral, I appreciate your words, but the damage has been done, and we all have to live with the consequences. I hope your report reflects what you actually learned here rather than what you expected to find. The exchange marked the end of Samantha's 18-month attempt to live a quiet life as a training instructor, and the beginning of her return to a world where every decision carried life-and-death consequences and where the price of exceptional abilities was measured in ways that most people could never understand.
6 months after her reactivation, Samantha Cross stood on a different kind of firing range. This one carved into the mountains of an undisclosed location where America's most exceptional warriors came to hone skills that officially didn't exist. The facility bore no resemblance to Fort Bragg's conventional training areas, its purpose-built ranges extending to distances that challenged even her extraordinary capabilities. But Samantha was no longer just an operator. Her new assignment reflected a recognition that her unique combination of operational experience and teaching ability represented an asset too valuable to waste on routine missions. She had been tasked with developing the next generation of precision marksmen for operations that required capabilities beyond conventional military training. Her students were hand-picked from the most elite units in American military service: Delta Force operators, Navy SEALs, Marine Force reconnaissance personnel, and Air Force Special Operations snipers whose existing skills placed them in the top 1% of military marksmen. Yet even these exceptional individuals struggled to match the standards that Samantha had demonstrated during her confrontation with Admiral Thornfield. "The rifle is just metal and wood," she told her current class, echoing lessons learned from her grandfather decades earlier. "The shot comes from within. Today, you're going to discover what that actually means."
The student who had just failed to hit a target at 1,500 meters was Master Sergeant Kevin Torres, a Marine Scout sniper with 15 years of experience and a combat record that included successful engagements at ranges exceeding 1,200 meters. His frustration was visible as he struggled to adapt conventional techniques to the extreme distances and environmental conditions that characterized Samantha's training program. "Ma'am, the wind conditions are constantly shifting, the target is barely visible even with high-power optics, and the ballistic calculations required for the shot exceed anything I learned in conventional sniper school." Samantha's response reflected both understanding and challenge, drawing on her own experience with impossible shots delivered under combat conditions. "Torres, you're trying to control variables that can't be controlled. Instead of fighting the environment, learn to work with it. The wind isn't your enemy, it's information. The distance isn't a barrier, it's simply another factor to incorporate into your shot." She moved to the firing line and assumed a prone position behind the same rifle that Torres had been struggling with. Her preparation was methodical but efficient, accounting for factors that most marksmen never considered: atmospheric pressure variations, temperature gradients at different altitudes, even the curvature of the Earth at extreme distances. "Watch my breathing pattern," she instructed. "Notice how I'm not trying to eliminate movement, but rather timing my shot to coincide with natural respiratory cycles. The human body has rhythms: heartbeat, breathing, neural firing patterns. Precision shooting means synchronizing with those rhythms rather than fighting them." Her shot cracked across the mountain valley, the sound echoing off distant peaks before the supersonic crack of the bullet's passage reached the target area. 1,500 meters downrange, the target shattered as the precision round struck dead center, demonstrating capabilities that continued to challenge her students' understanding of what was humanly possible. "How did you learn to do that?" asked Captain Lisa Rodriguez, a former Army Ranger whose own marksmanship abilities had earned her selection for the program despite the physical and psychological demands that eliminated most candidates. Samantha's answer reflected both the personal costs and the professional necessities that had shaped her into someone who could deliver impossible shots when lives depended on accuracy. "I learned by accepting that some shots can't be made using conventional techniques. When conventional methods fail, you have to find alternative approaches that work for your specific capabilities and circumstances." But the technical training was only part of what Samantha provided to her students. Her real value lay in preparing them for the psychological realities of precision shooting under combat conditions, where environmental factors were compounded by hostile fire, time pressure, and the knowledge that failure meant the death of American personnel who were depending on their abilities. The hardest shots aren't the ones at extreme distance. They're the ones where you have to make split-second decisions about taking a life to save lives. Technical competence is just the foundation. Mental preparation and moral clarity are what determine success when the stakes are real. Her students came to understand that they weren't just receiving advanced marksmanship training. They were being prepared for moral and psychological challenges that would test their character as much as their shooting abilities. Samantha's own experience with impossible choices provided context that no classroom instruction could match.
The training program's success rate was extraordinary by conventional standards, with graduates consistently outperforming personnel trained through traditional military programs. But more importantly, the techniques and mental approaches that Samantha taught were saving lives in operational theaters where conventional marksmanship training proved inadequate. Admiral Thornfield's final report to the Pentagon had been a masterpiece of professional introspection and policy recommendation. Instead of criticizing the training program he had originally intended to condemn, his document became a passionate argument for recognizing and developing exceptional capabilities regardless of the gender, background, or conventional qualifications of the personnel who possess them. "Our military's greatest asset," he had written, "is not our technology or our conventional training programs.
It's our ability to identify and develop exceptional individuals whose capabilities exceed normal parameters. Staff Sergeant Cross represents the kind of asset that can't be replaced through conventional recruitment and training methods. The report had contributed to policy changes that expanded opportunities for personnel with unconventional backgrounds and exceptional abilities, ensuring that future operators like Samantha would be recognized and developed rather than overlooked due to prejudice or narrow thinking. But perhaps the most significant change had occurred in Admiral Thornfield himself. His experience at Fort Bragg had forced him to confront assumptions and biases that had shaped his 30-year career, leading to a fundamental reevaluation of his understanding of military service and human potential. His subsequent assignments reflected a new approach to leadership that prioritized results over appearances, capabilities over credentials, and individual potential over conventional qualifications. The officer who had once dismissed Samantha as an unqualified instructor had become an advocate for identifying and developing exceptional personnel regardless of their background or the conventional expectations associated with their positions. As Samantha continued her work with the next generation of precision marksmen, she found a sense of purpose that had been missing during her 18 months as a conventional instructor. Her students weren't just learning technical skills. They were being prepared for responsibilities that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure in operational theaters where American lives hung in the balance. The program's unofficial motto, displayed on a plaque in the facility's main classroom, captured the essence of what Samantha had learned through her journey from trauma survivor to exceptional operator to instructor of the nation's most elite warriors. Precision is not about the weapon, it's about the wisdom to know when to take the shot and the courage to accept the consequences. Her story had come full circle, from the broken rifle at Fort Bragg to the precision instruments that her students used to push the boundaries of human marksmanship. But the real lesson wasn't about equipment or technique. It was about recognizing potential in unexpected places and understanding that true strength often lay hidden beneath quiet exteriors. The woman who had been dismissed as an unqualified instructor had become the person responsible for training America's most exceptional warriors. The broken rifle that was meant to ensure her failure had become the catalyst for a career that would influence military training for generations to come. Staff Sergeant Samantha Viper Cross had found her true calling, not just taking impossible shots, but teaching others that impossible was simply another word for untested, and that the most important victories often came from proving wrong the people who had decided you couldn't succeed. In the end, the greatest precision she had achieved wasn't measured in meters or accuracy percentages. It was the precision of finding her place in a world that needed exactly what she had to offer, at exactly the moment when her unique combination of skills and experience could make the greatest difference. The broken rifle had taught everyone who witnessed its use that perfection wasn't about having perfect tools, it was about having the wisdom, courage, and skill to make imperfect tools perform beyond their designed limitations when the stakes demanded nothing less than impossible results. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.